The old man hit the pavement hard enough that the sound carried across the parking lot. It was a Tuesday morning in early November, the kind of cold that gets into your bones before you even step outside. The Tim Hortons on Rue Saint-Denis had just opened its drive-through, and the lot was mostly empty except for a few cars and a dark green pickup truck idling near the dumpsters. Gideon Tulloch was 63 years old, a retired pipefitter from Saguenay who had spent 40 years crawling through tight spaces in paper mills and refineries. He had bad knees and a hearing aid in his left ear and a Harley-Davidson Road King that he rode every weekend from May to October, no exceptions. He was not a small man, but when 3 of them came around the side of the truck, he went down fast. The girl at the counter inside saw it happen through the window. She picked up the phone and then put it back down, which was the kind of thing people did when they weren't sure yet whether what they were seeing was real. Outside, nobody moved. There were maybe a dozen people within sight of what was happening. A man walking his dog stopped at the corner. A woman in a minivan rolled up her window. Someone at a patio table stood up and then sat back down again. Celia Vanbro was 19 years old, and she was crossing the parking lot on her way to her shift at the pharmacy 2 blocks over. She was carrying a reusable grocery bag with her lunch in it and a pair of headphones around her neck, and she had 12 minutes before she was supposed to clock in. She saw Gideon on the ground. She saw the 3 men standing over him. She saw the 4th one coming around the back of the truck. She kept walking toward them. People would ask her later why she did it. She never had a good answer. She said it wasn't bravery exactly. She said it was more like the opposite of stopping. Like her feet just didn't get the message to slow down. Her grandmother had told her once that real courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being afraid and not letting your feet know about it. Her grandmother had said a lot of things like that. Celia had grown up in her grandmother's kitchen on a dead-end street in Jonquière, eating toast with peanut butter at 6 in the morning while the old woman got ready for her cleaning shift at the hospital. Her grandmother, Odette, had worked that job for 22 years without missing a single scheduled day. Not once. Not through a blizzard, not through the winter. Her arthritis was so bad she could barely button her coat. She just went. Celia had learned a lot of things from watching Odette go. She dropped her bag at the edge of the curb. "Hey." The nearest man turned around. He was maybe 25, wide across the shoulders, wearing a hoodie with the hood still up. He looked at Celia the way people looked at things that appeared where they weren't supposed to be. "Walk away," he said. "This doesn't involve you." Celia looked past him at Gideon, who was trying to push himself up off the pavement with one arm. There was blood on his lip. His hearing aid had come loose and was sitting a few inches from his hand on the asphalt. "You need to stop," Celia said. Not loudly, not shakily, just clearly. The man in the hoodie laughed. One of the others said something she couldn't make out. The 4th one had come all the way around now, and she could see there was a length of chain in his hand, looped twice around his fist. "I said walk away," the man in the hoodie said again, and this time he stepped toward her. Celia didn't step back. What happened in the next few seconds was fast and not pretty and not something Celia had planned or practiced. She had taken a self-defense course the previous spring because her shift at the pharmacy sometimes ended at 11 at night, and the bus stop was 3 blocks away. She hadn't thought she'd ever use it. She'd mostly gone because her friend Jess had signed up, and Celia hadn't wanted her to go alone. She used it now. She caught the man's wrist as he reached for her, twisted the way she'd been taught, and shoved him sideways into the truck hard enough that he lost his footing on a patch of black ice and went down. It happened so fast that the others just stood there for a second, which was a second long enough for Celia to position herself between them and Gideon. "He's on the ground," she said. "It's over. Walk away." The one with the chain was staring at her. The one she'd knocked down was getting up slowly, not because he was hurt, just because the ice was slippery. None of them moved toward her. Across the parking lot, somebody finally called 911. The police arrived 7 minutes later. In that 7 minutes, Celia stayed where she was. She didn't move. She didn't raise her voice again. She just stood there between the old man on the ground and the 4 men who weren't coming any closer, and she waited. The man in the hoodie said a few more things during those 7 minutes. None of them are worth repeating here. When the cruisers pulled in, the 4 men scattered in different directions, which is what cowards do when the odds shift. 2 of them were caught before they reached the street. The other two were picked up later that afternoon. A police officer came over to Celia. His name was Constable Brule, and he had been doing this job for 11 years, and he had seen a lot of things. But he had not seen this before. A 19-year-old girl standing alone in a parking lot in November, grocery bag on the curb, blood from someone else's fight on her jacket sleeve, completely calm. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. "No," she said. "He needs help, though. His hearing aid fell. It's right there." Brule looked at her for a moment. Then he went to help Gideon. Celia picked up her bag and called the pharmacy to say she was going to be late. Gideon Tulloch had 2 cracked ribs and a bruised elbow and a cut above his left eyebrow that needed 4 stitches. He spent the night at the hospital in Chicoutimi for observation and was discharged the next morning. He didn't know the girl's name. He'd barely seen her face. He knew she was young and she hadn't run, and that was about all. He asked Constable Brule. Brule gave him the pharmacy's address, not because that was standard procedure, just because he'd been doing this job long enough to know when a thing deserved a proper ending. Gideon showed up 3 days later. He wasn't alone. He had driven up from Saguenay on the Road King, ribs and all, which his doctor had specifically told him not to do, and behind him came 7 other motorcycles. 8 bikes in total, parked in a row outside the pharmacy on Rue Saint-Denis on a Thursday afternoon in November, which was not something that particular block had seen before. Celia was behind the counter when her manager came to the back and said there was someone asking for her. She came out wiping her hands on her lab coat and stopped when she saw who it was. The old man from the parking lot, standing in the middle of the pharmacy with his ribs wrapped and his road jacket on and his hearing aid back in, holding a card in his hand. "I wanted to say thank you," Gideon said. He wasn't a man who gave speeches. He'd spent 40 years in industrial spaces where you said what you meant and skipped the rest. He told her simply that he knew what it cost to stand still when every instinct said to run, and that he had not expected a stranger to know that cost and pay it anyway. He gave her the card. It had his name on it and his number, and on the back he'd written 2 sentences in his careful, deliberate handwriting. "You are owed a favor. Name it when you need it." Celia looked at the card for a long moment. Then she looked up at him. "My grandmother," she said. "She can't afford her prescriptions. She's been splitting blood pressure pills in half for the past 4 months because the coverage doesn't cover the full dose." Gideon was quiet. "That's what I need," Celia said. "Not for me, for her." The pharmacy couldn't do much about the pricing. That wasn't where the fix came from. What happened instead was slower and less dramatic and more real. Gideon Tulloch had spent 40 years in pipe fitting, which meant he knew everyone in the trades network across the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, which meant he knew the regional director of a benefits coordination program that helped low-income seniors access provincial drug subsidies they were entitled to, but often didn't know how to apply for. He made a call that evening. The person he called made another. A caseworker named Sylvie visited Odette at her apartment the following week. Odette qualified for a subsidy she'd never known existed. Her prescription costs dropped by 70% in a single month. She called Celia crying. She thought Celia had somehow paid for it herself. "I didn't," Celia said. "Someone helped." "Who?" Celia told her about the parking lot, about the old man on the pavement, about the 7 minutes standing in the cold. Odette was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I told you your feet know more than your head sometimes." The story might have ended there, a small chain of decent things in a city that rarely made the news. But Constable Brule had a cousin who worked in regional radio, and the radio story got picked up by a journalist in Montreal, who wrote a short piece for a national outlet, and the piece was quiet and specific and not interested in making anyone a hero, just in saying that on a Tuesday morning in November, a 19-year-old pharmacy assistant had stood between a stranger and harm and not moved, and that things had rippled outward from that. The piece ran in early December. Celia's name was in it. She asked them not to use a photo. They didn't. What she didn't expect was the call from the University of Sherbrooke. She had applied to their health sciences program 2 years earlier. She'd been rejected. She hadn't had the marks in chemistry, and she hadn't had the money for an upgrade course, and she'd deferred the plan without fully letting it go. She was still working the pharmacy counter. She still sometimes looked up the application requirements on her lunch break. The call came from an advisor in the Faculty of Health Sciences. "A donor, anonymous," the advisor said, though the timing made the source fairly obvious, had funded 2 new entrance bursaries for applicants from regions with limited access to post-secondary education. Celia's prior application had come up in a review. Her grades in everything except chemistry were strong. If she sat a single upgrade exam in the spring and passed, her application would be reconsidered with the bursary attached. Celia sat at the back of the pharmacy on her break and read the email 3 times. She didn't cry. She wasn't built for that kind of crying, the happy kind. She just sat there for a while and breathed. Then she texted her grandmother. The text said, "I might have news. Don't get excited yet." Odette texted back immediately, "Too late." Celia sat the upgrade exam in March. She drove 3 hours to the testing center alone, stayed overnight at a budget motel, ate a bowl of soup in her room, and slept for 7 hours. She passed. Not barely. Not scraping through. She passed with a score that put her in the top quartile of the sitting, which was a fact the advisor mentioned on the phone, and which Celia received in silence. Because she was standing in the parking lot of the motel, and the wind was very cold, and she needed a minute. She started in September. She didn't hear much from Gideon during those months. A text in June that said, "How are the studies going?" and one in August that said, "Good luck," and one on the first day of term that said only a single word, "Go." She kept those messages. Not in any sentimental way, just in the regular way you kept things that were true. Odette came to Sherbrooke for the first weekend of fall term. She took the bus, 5 hours each way, because she didn't like to fly and she said trains were for people with luggage. She showed up at Celia's student apartment with a bag of groceries and immediately started reorganizing the kitchen without asking, which was her love language and always had been. They ate together at the small table by the window. Outside, the campus was full of people carrying boxes and saying goodbye to their parents and starting things. "You scared me, you know," Odette said. She was talking about the parking lot. "I know. I watched the video. Someone filmed it." Celia hadn't known that. She didn't say anything. "You didn't even flinch," Odette said. Celia looked at her. "You didn't flinch either, for 22 years, every morning, in the cold." Odette was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window at the campus, at all the young people starting things. "I was flinching on the inside the whole time," she said. Celia thought about that. "Me too," she said. The 4 men from the parking lot were charged with assault and criminal harassment. 3 of them took plea deals. The 4th went to trial and was convicted. The sentencing happened the following spring during Celia's 2nd semester. She didn't attend. She had an anatomy lab on that day, and she didn't ask to reschedule. She had already said everything she needed to say in her statement to police, which was 2 pages long and specific, and written in the same quiet, clear voice she had used in the parking lot that morning. She wasn't interested in what happened next for them. That wasn't her concern anymore. There's something people tend to get wrong about moments like this. They want to turn them into a story about one remarkable person who did what no one else could. But that's not what happened in that parking lot. What happened was that one ordinary person decided not to stop walking, and that decision made room for everything that followed. The call, the caseworker, the bursary, the exam. The September morning when Celia Vanbrugh carried a second-hand backpack through the doors of a building where she was going to learn how to help people who couldn't help themselves. None of that was inevitable. All of it depended on one thing. Her feet kept moving, the way you respond when it would be easier to cross the street. The way you stay when every reasonable instinct says go. That's not something you build in a single moment. It's built over years in someone's kitchen at 6 in the morning, eating toast, watching an old woman button a coat with swollen fingers and walk out into the cold without complaint. The big moments don't make you who you are. They just show you what you already became.